Okay, so welcome. Really delighted to welcome you all to the latest professional development webinar put on by ELTHI and SLC, Specialist Language Courses. Before we kick off, just a brief word about what we do and why we do this. So ELTHI is the global association for medical English teachers. And our membership tends to be teachers and researchers and translators who come to us for professional development opportunities, whether it would be the monthly webinars, the upcoming English for Healthcare conference, the resources in the members area, and so on. If you're not a member, it's only €55 for a year. Pretty good value. All the webinars are recorded and are on the members area, and there are lots of worksheets, lesson plans, links to research, and so on. So if you're not a member, let me show you where the website is. It's here, very simple. There we go. It's elthi.com. So if you're interested in becoming a member, if you're not a member, you just go to member benefits. And there you go. And there's the individual membership there. And if you're part of a university or a college or a school and you'd like an institutional membership, it's €190 and you get 4 members of staff, all with access to everything that ELTHI has to offer. So that's ELTHI. So that's elthi.com. So if I move on to specialist language courses, we are working with ELTHI hand in hand. Obviously, ELTHI is all about teaching English for healthcare, whereas what we do is that we create a lot of materials for English for healthcare. So we've got English for doctors, English for nurses, English for pharmacy, radiography. We have grammar for healthcare, written by Ros Wright, 2 levels, A2 to B1 and B2 to C1. Amazing courses, very interactive, lots of video, as well as terminology, OET preparation, IELTS preparation for those healthcare professionals who need IELTS to register somewhere and so on. As a university or as an institution, you can have access to all the content that we have for only about €6 per student per month. So it's a brilliant deal. And you can not only have all of it, you can actually take packages and have a set of courses which are specifically for medical students, for example. So if you're interested in what we do, this is the link here, specialistlanguagecourses.com/medical-english. All the information is there, and please reach out to me if you'd like to talk about how you can use these with your institution, your students. As an institution, you get your area on the learning management system with a full set of teaching features. Helen, who's going to give the presentation, uses it for her OET students, so I'm sure she can recommend us highly. But you have your own area branded, teaching features, everything going on. So please get in touch if you're interested. And finally, in September the 11th and 12th, if you haven't signed up, I really recommend you do sign up for the 7th International English for Healthcare Conference. This one is held in partnership with the Jagiellonian University, second oldest medical school in Europe. Beautiful premises at the heart of Krakow, just off this amazing medieval square, if you know that, with the big amber market and so on. Seventh conference. A couple of great keynote speakers. If I click on here, we've got Andy Ward, who gave a webinar for ELTHI 3 months ago. Really interesting, all about teaching empathy. And then really delighted to have our second keynote speaker, Rachel Roberts, who just gave a brilliant plenary at the IATEFL conference in Brighton in April. And she is exploring the very fast changing landscape for medical English teachers and what we can do about that. So I really urge you to come and take advantage. It's only about €150 to come. Krakow is easy to get to, a ton of great accommodation. There's a great restaurant for the gala dinner. So come. So if you haven't signed up, go for it. So a little bit about us. So that's ELTHI and SLC and our upcoming conference. We're delighted to welcome you here. We're all here because we are really interested in teaching medical English. Helen is someone who is well versed and by all accounts, a brilliant teacher from everyone that I have known who has come in contact with her. I'm going to hand over to Ros. Ros will then introduce Helen, and then we'll get things underway. So over to you, Ros.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Chris. Hi, Helen, and welcome to Alfie. And thank you for giving your time. I'm sure you're extremely busy and not sitting on that beach that's just right behind you. No. So for people who don't know Helen has been working as a premium OET provider for some years now. I'm not sure how many exactly, but quite a while. And she's based in Essex in the UK in the south. She has something in common with me in that she spent some years working in Japan, but not only in the university sector, also Japanese radio. So I'm well impressed by that. Okay, so today's talk is going to be about how you can use poetry in English for healthcare. So it's really, doing English for healthcare a little bit differently. And I saw a post pop up fairly recently by Helen where she talked about using poetry, and I thought, well, that would be something to share with our members. So I'm not somebody who's very well versed in poetry, and so I'm very intrigued to learn how it can be used in the classroom. And I will hand over to Helen, who will talk about just that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yes, thank you.
That's fine, Helen.
Lovely, thank you. So thank you very much to SLC and Elfie for having me today. My name's Helen Lewis from Helen Lewis Tutoring. And like Rose, as well as living in Japan, I was an English teacher in secondary schools before I went out there. So I had something of a continuing interest in poetry. And I wanted to talk about how you can use the power of poetry in the English for healthcare classroom. And I've kind of cheekily called this presentation, "What can you treat with a poem?" as a nod to the fact that our students are people who are treating patients, who are working in healthcare contexts. And the idea of treatment kind of stuck in my mind a little bit. So this is what we're going to cover today. What can you treat with a poem? I'm going to start with a bit of theory from this guy, Michael Rosen, who is the poet laureate. He's a fascinating writer and thinker, and I'm going to start off with some of his ideas about poetry. We're going to then look at the skills gap for healthcare professionals, especially those who have English as their non-native or their additional language. I'm then going to touch on a very serious topic of contraindications for using poetry. Like, why might poetry be resisted by our students, by healthcare professionals, and how can we get round those problems, those contraindications? And a contraindication is a reason not to do something. It's a term that I've taken from medicine. And then I'm going to move on to the benefits of using poetry, some simple classroom applications. I will show you 3 poems that I really enjoy and I think can work well with students. And then I'll throw it open to questions at the end. And please, if you've got any questions, do drop them into the chat. So we're going to start with a bit of theory from Michael Rosen. And it's around the question, well, what is poetry, right? People can spend years debating this, but he, in his book, offers a few nice ideas. A poetry has to rhyme or have a particular rhythm. A poem should have metaphors or similes, ways of comparing things. I think a lot of people will argue, a poem says something beautiful in an especially beautiful way. Not all poetry is beautiful. Sometimes poems say things that surprise us, that make us sad, that help us connect to difficult emotions. And finally, a poem should say something in a memorable way. So when you read something that's written by a poet, you should go, oh, hadn't thought of that. It makes me think. And I'd like to invite you, by the way, if anyone has any poems that they like, to drop them into the chat. Now, the trouble is with those ideas about what poetry is that there are other forms of writing that do the same things, right? So proverbs and wise sayings impart ideas in surprising ways. So a Japanese proverb, even monkeys fall from trees, meaning even experts are prone to error. And there's one here, I apologize if I haven't quite got it right, but it's a proverb of the medical profession. If you hear hooves, think horses, not reindeer. So in other words, go for the most obvious diagnosis first. So if you hear the sound of hooves, it's probably going to be a horse, unless you live in Lapland, not a reindeer. So to go for the most obvious diagnosis first, because that's more efficient. But both of these wise sayings have some kind of clear image, right? Even monkeys fall from trees. I can see a monkey falling out of the tree, maybe looking a bit embarrassed. Yeah. I can imagine someone, listening for the sound of an animal and thinking, what is it? What is it? And being surprised or not surprised. Jokes and puns play with language as well. One of my favorite jokes, Freudism, is where you say one thing and think of a mother. And I heard this one from Mark Commode recently. I'm going to see Operation Operation Hail Mary. So there's a play on the words there. It's not hugely funny, but it is something that language is played around with in a joke and a pun in the same way that poetry does. Here's one of my favorite Quaker sayings: it is better to light one small candle than to curse the darkness. So scripture says beautiful things, uses metaphors, teaches us things as well. And I'm sure people have their own sources of sayings that they know from their traditions. So Michael Rosen suggests we think, well, what can poetry actually do? Right? Rather than what is it, let's think about what it can do. And he suggests poetry can suggest things to us, can make us think of things. It can make familiar things unfamiliar and vice versa. It can make the unfamiliar feel familiar. It can give an impression of things. It can play with words, such as the Jabberwocky, that kind of poetry where it's he doesn't call it nonsense, he says nuance. Poetry can be symbolic. Poetry can borrow voices from other cultures or different people. It can express beliefs. And of course, I think the big thing is poetry can be personal. So he really thinks that all of these qualities, if you like, these functions of poetry do something that is only partially done by other forms of creative writing. So now I'd like to move on and say a few things about the challenges that I've seen with my learners. And I mainly teach the occupational English test. And I also do some work with those who are trying to get jobs in care in my hometown of Southend. Here are some things that I've noticed are difficult. So one is simply following natural speech, listening to natural speech and understanding not just what is being said, but how it is being said. And I think for anyone learning a second language, that's a huge difficulty. And I remember when I lived in Japan, I found this really difficult. So this is a real challenge. And of course, it makes a big difference, doesn't it, to our students, because if they miss something that a patient says because they can't keep up and they can't follow what's being said, there might be misdiagnosis, or there might be a breakdown of the relationship. There might be quite serious consequences. The next one I've come across when I'm teaching the occupational English test for the speaking subtest, expressing empathy naturally. Expressing empathy naturally. It's very tempting, I've noticed, for some learners to latch on to fixed phrases. One I'm thinking of in particular is, I understand how you feel. I completely understand how you feel. And I tend to try to guide my students away from saying that all the time, because very often it's said too soon with inadequate information. And healthcare professionals are caring people. They want to express empathy. They want to show that empathy quite quickly. But I've found that in the rush to say something caring and supportive, what actually appears is something that doesn't sound sincere. It sounds formulaic. It sounds a bit forced. So for me, I've really tried to work with my students on this side of things, and it does come from listening. Also relating to new cultures, I think this might be an issue of being once in the country that they want to work and practicing, actually getting to grips with a new culture. And for many people, the medical culture in which they trained is different to the medical culture in which they've moved from. Don't want to say one is better or worse, but simply there is a difference. And for people coming into patient-centered medical cultures, that can be quite difficult, because they forget to ask, do you understand? They forget to ask a lot of questions, but there's a bigger picture there, which is, you feel like you're a fish out of water. You feel, I know from my experience living in Japan, it can be really difficult. And that's a challenge. The next one, dealing with ambiguity. So when a patient or the relative comes to a healthcare professional, sometimes they have a story to tell, but they can't tell it very well, or they struggle to articulate. And I'm talking about the patients and the relatives. It is worth saying that not every patient and relative who goes into a healthcare situation has English themselves as their first language. So English may be used in that context between people who all have English as their second language. But also people find it difficult to express what's going on for them, for the simple fact that they're sick, or they're under pressure, or they're stressed out. So the healthcare professional needs to be able to notice when some piece of information is missing. And then finally, I just want to say that, you know, it's a very challenging job to be a healthcare professional. And I think that can take its strain. No matter how much someone is keen to be a healthcare professional, there will always be personal pressures, particularly if you're working in a new country. So one last thing to say is I've got a few contraindications now for using poetry. Why might people resist using it? And this comes from, this is a little bit of a cheeky reference from a scene from Fry and Laurie, who are two amazing British comedians. And in this scene, Hugh is reading a poem. I'll just read you a little bit of this and see if you can tell me what is the contraindication for poetry. So Hugh says, under the bellied skies where dust and rain find space to fall and lie and change again without a care or mind at all. For art and life and things above, in that there, just look there, No right, left, up, down, past or future, we have but ourselves to fear. Stephen, Hugh, you chose that poem. For God's sake, why? I chose it for a number of reasons, Stephen. I see, the most important being, can I perhaps turn that question round and say, because it was short? The poem? Yes, that's right. I chose that poem because it's short. And that's significant? Well, of course, with the pace of modern life being what it is, it seemed to me that most people just haven't got the time to spend on long poems. And this would therefore ideally suit the short-haul commuter or the busy housewife. This is a poem that can fit neatly into the most hectic of schedules and leave time for other sporting or leisure activities. So that represents quite a boon to the modern poetry reader. Oh, an enormous boon. Well, of course, we're always on the lookout for enormous boons, and I presume it's reasonably safe. Absolutely safe. This is a poem you could leave around the house in absolute confidence. Excellent. Presumably, though, there must be shorter poems than that one. Oh, good heavens, yes. Good heavens, yes. Good heavens, yes. There's a poem by Richard Maddox called Institutions that I can read for you now if you like. Please, here it is. Lee. That is short. It's very short indeed. Too short, perhaps. Possibly. So I think that really strikes me. It struck me because it gets to what people will sometimes say about poetry as reasons they don't want to engage with it, even if they're too polite to say this to me. So poetry may be seen as irrelevant. Like what does it actually have to do with the realities of treating a patient? It might be considered too difficult, something called word salad, just a bunch of words thrown on the page. It might be considered overly subjective or even overly analytical, disconnected from clinical work. So poetry does have a little bit of an image problem if we don't really tell the learners what the skills are that they can acquire through engaging with poetry. And I've listed some of them here. It might be decoding, understanding connected speech, rhythm, and unvoiced sounds. I think it strengthens observation and listening skills, because if you read a poem aloud, it helps you to notice how language is used to get an effect. It helps you tolerate and lean into ambiguity. Poetry can afford chances to access a new culture. And I want to say it's really important to give our learners the opportunity to bring poems from their cultures into the classroom in both the original language, and you can get translations as well. And because emotions are often the subject of poetry, I think by engaging with poetry, it can add some emotional resilience. And the knowledge that can be gained, well, there's the linguistic knowledge. There is a lot of vocabulary, words for emotions and so on. You can pick up the values of a new culture and the values of your home and your culture as well. Very often we can access those, especially through poetry from the learner's own traditions. So as a way of approaching poetry, I would tell the learners and involve them, what is the goal? So here I've just used some verbs, right, to say, this is the big pedagogical goal. This is why we're doing it. I know that the poetry may seem a bit strange to you, but the goals are there for you to enjoy and to learn from. So I have a question for you. Do you think that when you present a poem or present any form of material to learners, do you link it to workplace skills and competencies? Or do you just go to the enjoyment and the pleasure of accessing the poem? Or do you do a bit of both? I'm curious. Wonder what Ros might say or what people in the chat might say to that. Do you put everything that you do in a class into the structure, this is why we're doing it in the workplace? Or do you just say, this is going to be good fun, this is going to be enjoyable, you're going to learn some things, you might learn a poem you can quote? Yes.
I did my master's with Brian Tomlinson,
Okay.
and in materials development, and he was a massive advocate of using poetry, and he would start every session with a poem.
Oh, wow.
But quite often it was simply for enjoyment, and he really stressed the importance of that. I wasn't necessarily in total agreement, but this was really his thing. Interesting to see what other people say.
Yeah, thank you. Danielle is saying she connects to the healthcare specialty or illness or symptoms. Absolutely, because a lot of poetry does deal with these things. But yeah, I also like the idea of starting a lesson with a poem, just because it's refreshing, it's fun, it's enjoyable. Neil says, always share learning outcomes to provide a rationale for what's being studied. But yeah, a fan of the effective domain. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I do think, Joe is saying, why would enjoyment not be irrational? Exactly. I guess the reason I asked that question is because I feel so often when I start my lessons that students come to me with a very strict agenda, and the idea that, please give me phrases I can use is a common thing that I hear when I ask people, how can I help you? I need phrases. And yes, I fully agree that phrases are useful, but how you use them comes with a bigger set of knowledge and skills. So I would say ask learners their preferences as well, but make a decision about how you're going to use the poetry, I think is important to say. So with choice of text, I think a few things are worth saying. You want poems that are accessible, right? You don't necessarily want to start off with Chaucer, right? Or something that's completely arcane, but you do want to have something that people have space to explore. Think about whether you want something that's shortish, or I say chunky, that means with several stanzas, for example, Edward Lear and the poem I'm going to show you at the end. Poetry for children and young adults can work very well. But yeah, think about it. Is it going to be a poem that's related to healthcare or not? It doesn't matter, I think, but you just have some thinking in your mind about what would work with these individuals. And also translations, because that allows people to share something of their home culture, and then there can be a discussion about how the poem has been rendered. There's some lovely comments in chat. Every lesson should have moments of laughter and lightness. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so a very quick outline of how I would tend to use lesson planning with poetry. Choose the big pedagogical goal, something that comes earlier, of those goals that I've suggested earlier, or think of your own. One main task-based learning activity and one support activity. Plan how you want to have the poem discussed and used and explored. With number 4, I really can't recommend enough, if the lesson is all about poetry, back off and give the students some time on their own or in small groups with the poem. You can read the poem through once or play it through with audio, but I think giving learners a bit of privacy at the start has worked really well for me with my clients. And then also leave some space for surprise questions and topics. And then a task-based learning activity. This is with thanks to Leo Gomez, and he has this idea called Magoo. Whatever task you do, allow learners the freedom to make errors, but still complete the task. Make sure there is a gap. Learners don't share the same information, reasoning, or conclusion. So say you give a task for learners about a poem, because a poem has ambiguity built into it, then there will, by definition, always be some kind of gap around the knowledge and the information, the reasoning and the thinking of the students. Students need to use their own resources, notice what they cannot say, so stretch to explore new language. And then outcome, something the teacher can collect at the end. It might be a ranking, a recommendation list, presentation, a news story, or I've said presentation twice, I must really like it. The two presentations I was thinking of when I wrote this, one was when students just read the poem aloud and they comment on why they made their choices, about how they spoke. And then the other presentation could be something like a PowerPoint presentation with images for different parts of the poem. Okay, so I think we're coming up to the end of the time for this presentation. Here are the poems I recommend. This one, If, by Rudyard Kipling. It was voted the nation's favorite poem some time ago. This has got such a strong rhythm, and I've used it with learners who have really basic levels of English, and they've connected to it and read it, and they've had things to say about it. Another one is called I Am Angry by Michael Rosen. And this one uses, I'll just let you look at it on your own for a minute. Does anyone have any suggestions how they might use this poem with learners? So this one is really good for rhythm. I am angry, really angry, 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 angry. I'm so angry. I'll jump up and down. I'll roll on the ground, make a din, make you spin. And he goes on and on and on until, and then go to bed. And the rhythm changes at this point because it goes from 1, 2, 3 beats to, and then go to bed, 5 beats. And inviting learners to see that change in tempo is really really rewarding. But this could lend itself to a group reading. This could lend itself to a rewrite. What are some other verbs and things that people do when they're angry? Why is it that the student is angry? Why is it the poetry collection is called A Great Big Cuddle? I don't know why it's called A Great Big Cuddle, but I think it's something to do with validating emotions, but that's the name of the work. Yeah. This could be a way of addressing the stress of a healthcare professional's job, offers Neil. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, healthcare professionals have to carry so much, don't they, from one patient to the next, and having that emotion validating. Considering compassionate empathy in mental health contexts. Beautiful. And then the last poem that I personally find great is called Everything is Waiting for You by David Whyte. So I'll leave this up on the screen for a minute and see if you have any ideas. Again, a really different poem, isn't it? So for this one, I was thinking, what are the what's the problem of the person who's addressed in this poem, to explore that. Maybe to write a social prescription for the person in this poem, to make a list and rank them of all of the things that might help this imagined person in the poem, to maybe reform some of the metaphors like the kettle and the cooking pots, or even just to make a visual presentation from this poem. So there are many things that can be done with poetry, and I do really recommend this book, What is Poetry by Michael Rosen. He gets into lots of different activities that can be done. Patient stories, says Roz, absolutely brilliant. And if you're interested in getting learners to write poetry, this book by Stephen Fry, even though he did a sketch mocking poetry, this book, The Ode Less Travelled, has got lots of activities, short ones for getting people to just use basic words and to make poetry from it. So that's all from me. Are there any questions or comments from anybody?
Thank you, Helen. That's really interesting. I think sort of your I can't even say that.
Contraindications, yeah.
Contraindications. That's a great approach, actually, and highlight the goal of why you're doing it is because I do tend to agree with Neil that that a lot of they're time pressured in terms Absolutely. Of their learning schedule, etc. And so if it's not instantly understandable, like why are we using, what's the rationale then? But then enjoyment, maybe that is the rationale. It's quite possible.
Oh, lovely. We've got this is what I was hoping for, some recommendations from poetry. His Snow. I peel and portion a tangerine and feel the drunkenness of things being various. Amazing. So thank you very much for having me, Roz.
No, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. I liked in particular your, I guess the haiku, right? If you hear hooves, think it's not reindeer, and even monkeys fall from trees. I mean, even monkeys fall from trees is a great way to start off any session with a new group in a way.
Yes.
Because we've got this imposter syndrome on our side, and then they've probably got an imposter syndrome as well, learning English. But this whole sort of you're not going to get it within week one. It will take time, and even monkeys fall from trees. I think is a great way to start a course. Actually,
I love that.
It's simple, it's people can grasp it, and good way to launch a course, I think.
Thank you.
Currently got one question in the Q&A. Let me just find it, hold on. Okay, it's from Neil. So Neil says, for a reading / listening skills based lesson, how do you think that Celia and Leo's task-based paradigms, how do you link this, to Celia and Leo's task-based paradigms? Aren't these more related to language, in inverted commas, lessons?
I think that poetry is language, right? It's language in a specific context. So I think as long as we're transparent about the fact that this is in a particular context for more of a playful purpose, and there's no reason why we can't integrate a piece of more functional language from OET. I mean, I can think of the phrase, I completely understand what you're saying, right? And to have that, maybe like the patient says something and then the healthcare professional paraphrases it, you could bring in some sort of prompt like that. But I do agree. But I love the idea of demystifying and poetry and keeping it accessible by just asking people to make something with the poem, something that's collectible, because then the learners have some ownership of it. And and there's no reason why a teacher can't still come in and say, no, you haven't quite understood that word right, or I think the poem to offer some corrections as you go, but that's not the main goal of using task-based learning. I think it's to develop confidence and facility with the language.
Sure. I mean, your use of poetry, I think, for developing an understanding of tone, and rhythm in speech, pitch, etc. I mean, do you have any suggestions on that? You're preparing, an OET candidate for speaking, but so, sort of kind of monotonous in the way they speak. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, so to take the same poem, could be one that they're interested in, or one that you've brought to it, even the I Am Angry poem.
Good one, actually.
And then to explore different pitches, even at that level. I will often get students to clap, or I have a pandeiro from Brazil, like I sometimes use that to beat with. But to just invite people to read the poem in different tones, different volumes, different speeds, and to really feel how that is when the sounds come out of your mouth, right, in your breath, and to connect to that. And I think that's very useful, because it's something very primal, and it can become formulaic, like I say. Alan's asked a quick question. The benefits of building tolerance or comfort of ambiguity. I think it just means that basically at bottom level, a patient says something and the doctor or the nurse or healthcare professional can say, tell me more. They don't expect to know the answer. They're able to sit with the answer to open questions. We tell students to ask open questions, but do we teach them how to listen to open questions, and how to handle things unfolding?
That's a good point. I mean, I see how a lot of poems could be used in terms of sort of better understanding patient stories, and then maybe developing. I don't know how would you sort of work on that, for example?
A poem, it could be that you take the poem and then turn it into some case notes, right? I mean, maybe it wouldn't be so interesting. I don't know, but I'm just sort of spitballing ideas here. But to maybe write a diary, to take a few lines from a poem and to put that into the answer to an open question, and invite more language to come up. I mean, a very simple question Michael Rosen says is to ask, what does this remind you of? And it could be a patient story. Could also be TV. It could be something they've read. It could be something they've heard, an advert. But yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, I think there's a lot of mileage. I guess my issues, it was interesting. You said, don't start with Chaucer. And I guess possibly where some of us might be stumbling at, I wouldn't want to speak for everybody, but maybe where some of us are a little bit sort of hesitant is possibly the way that poetry was taught to us at school.
Great.
And that very heavy top down.
Absolutely.
Shakespeare's sonnets or Chaucer, and it's like, oh, okay.
And I think the thing to resist is saying, what do you think the poet means, all the time, as though there's a single interpretation. And sometimes people just can't say what they think it means. So I think that's where having a task-based learning has some validity pedagogically, because you get people to use the language and recycle it in a way that resonates with them, rather than staying in this kind of, what do you think it means? And it's very top down and quite intimidating. But I thoroughly recommend both these.
Can you hold them up? Sorry, can you hold them up higher, because they're hidden in the
scene?
Sorry,
So
they're still hidden. You need to come forward. What is poetry?
What is Poetry by Michael Rosen, and then The Ode Less Travelled by Stephen Fry. But I will send a list of resources for you to share, Ros, with
that would be
everyone.
Wonderful. Yeah. think you've really sort of opened up the debate on the use of poetry for sure, and it looks as though you're really sort of encouraging people to give it a go. I'm certainly going to use the one about the monkeys.
Yeah, and let me know how it goes, whatever you try to do. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
So, thank you very much, Helen. If there are any more questions, I think we're okay.
Okay.
But I think the whole idea of possibly using poetry in the classroom. I think it's possibly us that have been more resistant to it in the past, the actual learners. I mean, learners will do what you ask them to do, won't they?
Yes, they will. Yeah, they will.
The resistance,
is on our side. Absolutely.
On our side.
So hopefully we've chipped away at that a little bit today. So thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody for being present. And we look forward to seeing you in the next webinar, which will be in August. And that will be Joanna Kretu talking about, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, intonation, I believe. All right. Thank you so much, Helen.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.